Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
Whatever or whoever it is that haunts that house, the manifestations are the most powerful and evil in their experience. They all mention nameless horrors.
This is Malcolm Robinson and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal network, and this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Going to be definitely interesting, something you don't want to miss.
Hello and welcome to another Paranormal Dimensions. I hope everyone's trying to stay safe and keeping your sanity out there in these troubled times. Thank you for that intro, Malcolm. Now, today's guest is Mr. Simon Entwistle. He has his own show on this network, and he's going to be telling us a few ghost stories, and I'm sure we'll find out a little bit more about Simon. So, here we go. Let's meet Simon. Hello, Simon. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure, David. Always great to talk to you.
It's fantastic to have you back. You were on the June, it was on the June the, I don't know what date was, but it was in June of 2019 you were on before. That was show number 18, believe it or not. This is actually show number 84. So I'm actually amazed I've got this far.
You've done very well, David.
But, I mean, I never would have foreseen it to come this far, but, and your show's still doing well. It's very popular still, isn't it?
Yes, we kept going, David, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know. I've heard quite a few of them, and they're brilliant. But and I'm sure they do well around the world. I know they get a good listenership anyway.
That's great.
Anyway, so how's business been for you with all this COVID lockdowns and God knows what else has been going on?
David, it's been devastating, actually. I run my own tourism business. They consist of coach tours, ghost walks, visits to halls, etc. And because of the social distancing, I've lost all the coach tours. I was a regular at 3 gorgeous halls in the north of England. They've all had to be cancelled. So I've had a lot of time on my hands, really, mainly just at home. But it was fine for the first 3 months, but after a while it does get very, very boring.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think one of them was the Samlesbury Hall, is it? Which one that I actually know well.
It's a very, very beautiful building. Samlesbury Hall, Stanley Hall, Gawthorpe Hall, and Brusham Hall. I've been a regular there for quite a long time now, and they've had to close because of these terrible restrictions, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, have they actually closed right up?
Well, they are doing lunches. And the shop is open, but they're not doing any guided tours because of this social distancing. And of course, the halls some of the rooms are quite tight, really. So getting 40 people in there under these COVID rules just wouldn't happen, David. Really.
I know it must be. So well, they really must be suffering financially terribly. These places, mustn't they? Plus, it's all the smaller people that get laid off as well, isn't it? You know, when I say smaller people, it doesn't mean their importance. But unfortunately, there is a hierarchy and unfortunately, the sort of the cheaper labour people do get laid off, don't they? You know.
Yes, they're the people that suffer first, David. But what I can't really understand is that apparently in Sweden there's no lockdown whatsoever,
I know.
And they seem to have a much lower death rate than the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Well, I don't really want to get into this death rate thing. I don't know if you know about my beliefs in all this, but it's kind of a different life to what I've got on this radio show.
Okay,
I actually don't believe a lot of what we're told. I mean, on the basis of my things. I don't believe a lot of what we're being told anyway. The readings are all wrong. They actually admitted that they've got a lot of the readings, like the COVID readings, doubled up and everything. I don't want to go too much detail about it, but and I will just say also that, to my knowledge, they still haven't isolated COVID-19 from any other coronavirus. This is why they talk about coronavirus rather than COVID-19. And if anyone out there can send me a link that tells me exactly how they've divided COVID-19 from any other coronavirus, please send it to me. Because as far as I know, there's nothing out there. Even the government's been asked that question and nothing's come back.
Right.
So, anyway, but I think, leave it there, unless you want to say something else about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise we'll be going on all about COVID, and I think we're getting enough of it on the television and radio as it is. But, anyway, I obviously you've not been able to do your tours, but, obviously you're still doing your, radio show with your ghost stories, and have you got some good ghost stories to relate to our people out there?
I certainly
They
have.
wouldn't have heard on my show anyway, they might, yeah.
I certainly have, Dave, and what I love about ghost stories is they get people's attention.
Yeah.
I do visit schools, and in some cases primary schools actually, and I was very surprised when I was first asked, because I said to the teachers, well, do kids really want to hear about blood, gore and horror? And she said, oh yes, the more the merrier.
That's right, yeah, we all did back then.
It's really great to have a captive audience with children, really, and one story which always gets the attention, we mentioned Samlesbury Hall before, Dave.
Yeah.
There's a huge connection with the famous Pendle witch trials of 1612, a huge connection with a group of ladies known as the Salem Hall Witches, and they were all arrested at exactly the same time as the Pendle Witches, and they were sent to the city of Lancaster to be put on trial at the same time. But they were kept in a totally different cell to the Elizabeth Southern, to Anne Whittle, to Anne Redfern, to Catherine Hewitt, Alice Gray, Elizabeth Devise, James Devise, Jeanette Devise, and Alice Nutter, John and Jane Bulcock. They were the Pendle Witches, and they were all found guilty of witchcraft on the 20th of August 1612. In the next cell were the Salem Hall Witches, and they consist of Jane Southworth and Jean and Ellen Brayley. Jean and Ellen were both twin sisters, and they were very, very good friends of Jane Southworth. Now, you imagine Salisbury Hall, beautiful, beautiful building. Jane's father was Sir Richard Southworth, an exceptionally wealthy man. And you can imagine the horror when he heard banging on the door of the main hall. He opened the door, and there was the King's Commissioner from Lancaster City Castle. In the name of the King, we arrest you, Jane Southworth, Eugene and Ellen Brayley, under the Witchcraft Act. The three of them were absolutely horrified. They were chained, placed in a cart, and transported from Salisbury Hall over what we call the beautiful Trough of Bowland, this rather gorgeous road that led into the city of Lancaster. There they were thrown into the cell next door to the Pendle Witches. They never saw them. They may have heard muffled shouts and screams from the thick castle walls, but on the 20th of August 1612, Jane Southworth heard this huge roar, and she climbed on the shoulders of her two best friends, the Brayley sisters, looked out of her cell window, and there, to her horror, she saw the Pendle Witches standing on trestles with ropes around their necks in the courtyard beneath her. And then, to her horror, she saw the trestles being kicked out from underneath each individual one of them. These people did not hang. They strangled to death. It was a slow, slow strangulation. Jane witnessed the whole of this terrible execution, and then she heard the sounds of footsteps that got louder and louder and louder. A key was placed in her cell door. The cell door opened, and there was Mr. Thomas Cavell, the head jailer of Lancaster City Castle. Right, you three. We just dealt with that lot. It's your turn next. Follow me. You can imagine the horror, the paranoia, the fear that must have haunted Jane, because she just witnessed the execution. And they made their way up the twisting staircase and into exactly the same courts that had just dispatched the Pendle Witches. They stood in front of Sir James Altham, Sir Edmund Bromley, Thomas Potts, Roger Nowell, William Holden and John Bannister, the prosecution. There was no defence council because no one dared take on the King of England. It was going to be very, very one-sided. Now, as was the case with the Pendle Witches and the Salisbury Hall Witches, they had child witnesses, and it was believed at that period of time that children could not be manipulated. In the case of the Salisbury Hall Witches, they brought in a little girl of 6 years old. She was called Gracie Sowerbuts. Gracie was the head gardener's daughter of Salisbury Hall. Just 6 years of age, she was brought into the courts, and Roger Noel, the local magistrate, picked her up and put her on top of a desk so the jury could see her. The two circuit judges, James Altham and Edmund Bromley, then shouted, "Right, young lady, read out your testimony against these 3 witches." "I will, sir. I was walking along the banks of the River Ribble, sir. I saw Jane Southworth and the 2 Brearley sisters swimming in the river, sir. It was a very, very hot summer's day. I then saw these unusual dogs. I've never seen the breed before, sir. Unusual dogs with cloven hooves, very large heads like bears, long backs. They jumped into the river, sir. They then materialised into human beings, slightly dark-skinned human beings. They picked up all 3 women. They danced in a circle. They paired off for a meal. I then watched from a distance, sir, as fraternisation was taking place with these demonic spectres. On the 2nd day, Ellen Brearley came to see me. She changed from a woman into a dog, sir, and she tried to suffocate me under a blanket of straw, but I escaped. On the 3rd day, the 3 of them came to see me again, sir, Jane Southworth and the 2 Brearley sisters. They said, "Gracie, would you like to have a bit of fun today?" I said, "What do you mean by fun?" "Well, at Salisbury Hall, a little boy has just been born called Thomas Walshman. He's been born to one of the footmen. We would like to drink his blood." "No, no, no," said young Gracie. "But he hasn't been christened," said Jane Southworth. "No, no, I don't want to get involved in that." James Altham, one of the head judges at Lancaster City Castle, brought the gavel up and was about to sentence them to death when his companion, Sir Edmund Bromley, said, No, 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 no. Let her finish her testimony. Continue, young lady." "Sir, in the dead of night, they made their way to Salisbury Hall, and they walked up to the long gallery where the little Welshman boy was sleeping. They took him from his cradle. Over 4 nights they repeated this process by pricking his stomach and drinking his blood. He then died, sir, of blood loss, and was buried at Salisbury Church, sir. In the dead of night, the 3 of them came back, sir. They dug at the coffin. They took the baby from the coffin. They boiled the baby's flesh. They consumed the flesh and kept some body ointments that would enable them to change shape. James Altham then picked the gavel. "Right! We find the 3 of you guilty of witchcraft. You will die like the rest of them." Before the gavel came down, Jane Southworth pulled off what I can only describe as a short miracle. "Sir, sir, I beg of you to cross-examine this young girl, sir. She has been manipulated by a Catholic priest hiding at Salisbury Hall called Thomason, sir." Just that one word, Catholicism, made the judges sit back. "You're an Anglican, you say?" "Yes, sir. I'm married into the Southworth family, sir. They've never liked me because of my Anglican views, sir. This young girl's been manipulated by a Catholic priest hiding at Salisbury Hall, sir. Please cross-examine her." They took Gracie next door. You can imagine Jane and the 2 Brearley sisters must have felt real intense frustration and fear and worry. Were they going to hang? Or were they going to be set free? After what seemed an eternity, the judges came back into the court with young Gracie Sowerbuts. "Let's restate the grouping, please." Everyone took their seats, and Jane and the 2 Brearley sisters waited. "In the light of new evidence, we find you, Jane Southworth, Eugene and Ellen Brearley, innocent of the crimes against you. You are free to go." The 3 of them hugged each other. They jumped for joy. As they left Lancaster City Castle, Jane turned, and she saw the pillory, the scaffold. She saw the pendulum still hanging and blowing in the wind. At the end of the pillory were 3 empty nooses, and they realised they had not only saved their lives, but the lives of the 2 Brearley sisters as well. The story hasn't really finished. They got back to Soldiery Hall. Sir Richard was delighted to see his daughter, and they had a meal and a celebration that went long into the night. However, 200 years later, in the nearby village of Worley, near Clitheroe, two local doctors sat round a roaring fire in a beautiful old inn called the Worley Arms, Dr. Whitaker and Dr. Dawson. They discussed the Pendle Witch story, and they discussed the Salisbury Hall story. And that's when Whitaker said to Dawson, "I believe young Gracie Salberts was probably telling the truth." "How?" said his companion. "Well, the way she described those dogs in the river are exactly the same description of the dogs belonging to the Pendle Witches. Alison Devise, Anne Redfern, Elizabeth Southern and Anne Whittle all had dogs. Tib, Bull, Fancy, Dandy. And these dogs are exactly the same shape as was described by young Gracie Salberts. And don't forget, she would not have been in the court that day to hear the hearings. She was an eyewitness account. But most importantly, let's write to York Minster and get permission from the Archbishop of York to exhume the Welshman coffin." They wrote to York Minster. The Archbishop of York sent an envoy, the Reverend John Franks, to make sure that the work was done in a professional manner, and also to Church of England rules and regulations. They waited for nightfall. They lit 2 lanterns, and they made their way to the Salisbury Church. There they paced out the exact location of the Welshman grave, and they started to dig. Just 2 feet beneath the surface, they came across a lozenge-shaped child's coffin. Under Church of England rules and regulations, it was opened and found to contain absolutely nothing. It seems that young Gracie may just have been telling the truth. We shall never, ever know.
Wow. I'll tell you what made my blood curdle when you said about the blood of children being drunk. We hear a lot of stories they're going around right now, don't we, about it still going on. But we should try not to get into that too much either. But
well, as I say, David, the only window we have in this whole story is a book written in 1613 by a chap called Thomas Potts. Thomas Potts was sent up from London by King James I, along with Sir Edmund Bromley, Sir James Altham, to oversee the proceedings. And Thomas Potts wrote this book, which became extremely popular. And his family to this very, very day receive huge royalties. It's the only window we have into this whole story, but this... No two ways about it, David. If Steven Spielberg got his teeth into the story of the Pendle Witches, and indeed the Salisbury Hall Witches, he would have a Hollywood blockbuster.
Absolutely, yeah. It's amazing that to me that nobody's ever actually done that. You know?
There's been many documentaries, but they've been quite boring, really. They've been very boring documentaries, all based on Potts' book, of course.
Yeah.
So we need to get some professional actors in there, and buildings like Salisbury Hall still exist. Lancaster Castle still exists. The home of Alice Nutter in Roughly still exists. The home of Jeanette Preston in Gisborne still exists. So they could be used again, David. And again, I mean, Spielberg is one of those great producers that could really produce a blockbuster.
Yeah. I mean, the only attempt they've ever really tried with that type of thing was the Witchfinder General, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Matthew Hopkins,
yeah. And there was another one with Oliver Reed, I think. That was quite, The Devils, wasn't it? That was quite a nasty film back then. I think it was almost banned, wasn't it? Because of,
gosh, yeah. And of course then there's the Salem, the trials in Salem, which, of course, were done under British rule in Massachusetts. And again, they used a child witness. But they have made a good film on the Salem Witches, and that was exceptionally good, really. But you know, it was a terrible period of time, particularly for women, David, because in those days women weren't allowed to possess a brain, would you believe? Would really be looked down on as servants more than human beings, really.
Yeah, it's disgusting, really. I mean, even there are still countries in the world that still do treat women like that, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, terrible. I was just like, on some of your tours, do you ever get, do people generally believe in ghosts, or do you get, people, I don't know, sort of questioning the truth of the validity of some of these stories?
Well, the one question I get asked a lot, David, is have I ever seen a ghost? Well, the answer is no. But there again, I'm not a medium. I'm not a psychic. I'm not a clairvoyant. I'm a collector of ghosts. I do get hired by quite a few of the paranormal companies like Haunted Happenings, Dusk Till Dawn, Spooktacular, and they will send groups to Pendle. I will tell them the whole story from the forest of Pendle, a place called Malkin Tower, and they bring their mediums in. They can see things which I can't, I will be honest with you. What has happened on a few occasions, David, and I can't really get my head around it, and it's happened on the coldest days of January and December. This beautiful aroma can come from nowhere, and it's like walking into a flower shop. And it is actually quite amazing when it happens, really, because but the mediums that have picked this up, and they believe it's actually something from the other side that has brought sweet smell with it. Yeah. Beautiful smell.
I have experienced that myself. It's strange, isn't it? How it you get the smell of tobacco or something coming up,
yes,
and there's nobody smoking around.
No, very, very true.
Do you ever get people, a lot of non-believer, that sort of poo-poo it all and sort of have a go at you, or does that not happen?
Well, usually it has happened, but usually with alcohol. When people have been drinking, they can get
a couple of beers. Yeah,
they can get a wee bit stroppy sometimes. But I never advertise myself, David, as a ghost hunter, or a paranormal investigator. I'm just a collector of ghost stories, which I've always found fascinating, really.
Yeah. What are your favourite books on the subject? Have you got any favourites?
Well, I tend to find not so much books, David, but talking to eyewitness accounts. They're the people that I find absolutely fascinating, and you've really introduced my next story, actually, because it is a very beautiful story, but also a very, very true story.
That wasn't, anyone listening out there, this wasn't rehearsed.
No. I had an acquaintance, I wouldn't say a friend, but a chap I knew quite well. A lovely chap called Ian, and Ian had quite a marvellous life, really. He was once a professional footballer with Preston North End Football Club. He then ran a business in Clitheroe, and I got to know him quite well, actually. He was always a very, very pleasant man to talk to. And he has actually passed away, but I met him quite a few times before he died, and he said, "You know, Simon, I'm one of the luckiest men on the planet. I've died 3 times." And he was actually pronounced dead 3 times, but through our marvellous National Health Service and paramedics, his life was saved. He had 3 very, very serious heart attacks and was saved by defibrillators and, of course, professional help. I met him after heart attack number 2. And he telephoned me and said, "Simon, I've got one hell of a story for you." I went to this cafe in Clitheroe called the Emporium. Now, the Emporium was an old Methodist chapel, a very, very beautiful building. It almost Greek to look at from the outside, huge pillars, etc. And in 1962, it closed down. For a while, it was a car showroom, and then it became the Emporium. Now, the Emporium is a bit like a bistro. It's a bit like a wine bistro. You can get meals there as well. After heart attack number 2, Ian went in there with a friend, and it was about 10:30 in the morning, and they ordered 2 coffees. And Ian looked up and saw at the end of the bar a man that seemed to want to get his attention. This man looked quite scruffy, really. He had long greyish hair. He had glasses, a white polo-neck sweater on, corduroy pants, and some brogue shoes, and he seemed to want to get Ian's attention. Each time Ian looked up, he was looking straight at him, which embarrassed him a little bit. He then nudged his pal sitting next to him and said, "What's that man at the bar doing? He keeps looking at me." His friend turned and looked at the bar. "There's no one there." "Yes, there is," said Ian. "He's at the end of the bar. I promise you and tell you, there's no one there." The man then turned and seemed to walk past the bar and disappear. That's when Ian telephoned me, because he realised he'd seen something very, very strange. he came to my house. I made him a cup of coffee. We had a good chat. I then went upstairs and I got a fantastic book called Clitheroe, 1,000 Years by the Late Arthur Langshaw. And there's one section there on the 4 Methodist chapels that have all closed down. I came downstairs, sat down next to Ian and skipped for the page, said, oh, there's the old Methodist chapel on Moor Lane, closed in 1962. And the last reverend was called Mr. John Mullineaux. I then flicked a page over and there was a photograph of Mr. John Mullineaux. Ian went a deathly white. He said, that's the man I saw. And the man was indeed wearing a white polo-neck sweater. He had what looked like corduroy pants on. It was a black and white photograph, and brogue shoes. And Ian said, Simon, that is him. That is him. Sadly, within 6 weeks of Ian coming to my house, he had passed away with a 4th and final heart attack. But that story came from his heart. It really, really did. I've done many tours from the Emporium, and I do use Ian's story, and I've often wondered if he's looking down from up there and having a bit of a giggle as I tell the story, but he was absolutely convinced. When he saw the photograph, it just confirmed the story quite beautifully, really. It
makes you wonder if maybe he was getting a message from that particular person that was maybe going to help him along on his way, maybe, because you do hear that people, when they're close to death, they do see people on the other side, and who knows, maybe he was one of his guides or something.
Quite possible. What I do know is when the building was purchased by a firm called James's Place, they have quite a few hotels in the area, right behind the building is a Sainsbury's supermarket. And when they started to dig their foundations in, behind the Emporium, they were horrified because they found the foundations actually encroached on a little cemetery. And as a result, of course, the authorities were brought in. They said, well, you've got to remove all the coffins, you've got to remove all the interned people there. And they were moved to nearby Waddington Road Cemetery. And that's when strange things started to happen in the Emporium. One of the coffins taken down to Waddington Road was that of the Reverend John Mullineaux, and it was in his dying wishes to be buried in that cemetery. So who knows, he might be a little bit angry about having his body removed from there and taken down to Waddington Road.
Now, what was that book called again? Clitheroe Ghosts by Arthur...
it was called Clitheroe, 1,000 Years by the Late Arthur Langshaw. It's a fantastic book. Clitheroe, 1,000 Years.
I was trying to scribble it down as you said it, but I was trying to keep up with what you were saying as well. But,
I do tend to use that book, a lot of the information on it, on my tours, because it does bring a lot of history into the actual guided ghost walk as well, David.
Yeah, is it available still on Amazon?
I believe you might be able to get it on Amazon. It's possible. I've got quite an old one actually, which my mother left me, really, but it is a fascinating read. It really, really is.
Yeah, let's have a look and see if it's available. Or usually when they're that old, they're usually going for silly money, aren't they? Like £1,000.
Yeah, very much so, David. Yeah,
you do tend to get that. Yeah, that was an interesting story. So, what are your own beliefs in ghosts? You obviously do believe in them, don't you?
Yes, yeah. I mean, David, I believe there is a life after this one. I mean, I really do, and I think when talking to people like Ian, I mean, Ian very, very nearly got to the other side, and I think he came back, and came back probably with some powers actually. But I do believe there's another life after this one, and I also personally believe that if someone has lost their life in a very, very sad and horrific manner, then their spirits might still have a connection with the area. But there again, you see, I'm not a paranormal investigator.
No.
It's the stories which interest me, David, not so much the scientific side.
Like the evidence behind it, yeah. But
that's right.
When people die like a traumatic death, like a murder or a sudden accident or something, they often it seems that they don't know they're dead. So obviously,
I believe that's true. Yes, that's very feasible. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, it does seem to be the case, doesn't it? Because they seem to relive that moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, I had Richard Felix on the show earlier this year. Probably a couple of months ago. Yeah, and he related quite a few interesting stories, and you know, I don't know if you did hear that story, but it was quite a good show actually. I quite enjoyed it. But
I'm sure.
I think you've met him a couple of times as well, haven't you?
Yes, yeah. I've met him in Derby actually, at the Derby jail. Yeah, we had a few beers and the odd brandy and a right good chat. But there was a lot of people there as well from the Most Haunted team, and Phil Wyman was there as well. And it was quite nice to have a chat to those people, really.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting place if anyone ever gets a chance to go and visit.
It is, and what I do like about Richard is very, very enthusiastic, and he's a great collector of ghost stories, and I suppose I am as well, really.
Yeah, much like yourself, yeah. So what's your next story you've got lined up for us?
This is a very, very beautiful story. It's an affair of the heart, really, and we're going to make our way up to a lovely county, which now sadly has gone, and that county was called Westmoreland. Westmoreland, as the locals call it, is now South Cumbria. Cumberland and Westmoreland both amalgamated in 1974 to make up one big county rather than two. Of course, South Cumbria has the beautiful Lake District, but there are some very, very gorgeous areas just beneath the English Lake District, down towards the Lancashire border. And this is a story from the Victorian period. And we're going to make our way to a little hamlet called Heversham, and above Heversham is a huge limestone outcrop, about a mile long and about a quarter of a mile wide, with a forest on the top of it. The views from there are absolutely gorgeous. In fact, Sir Winston Churchill went there many times, and he said the views captivated him. And the views are still there to this very, very day. You can see right into the English Lake District, right into what we call the Kent Estuary, and right out to the Irish Sea. It is absolutely beautiful. And so is the forest on top of it. But we're now going to turn the clock back to 1856, and a gentleman called John Padstow. Now, John was a London journalist. He worked for the Central News Agency. And in the 1850s, of course, you couldn't go abroad for your holidays, really, mainly due to travelling problems, if you will. So what John used to do, when he had his summer holidays, he would pick a certain part of Great Britain and he would go for a walking holiday. He would walk from town to town, but he would also plan his visits beautifully by writing to inns and bed and breakfast and planning his walks beautifully. He bought, of course, a map of South Lakeland and planned his walk that day. He was going to walk from the town of Kendal to the town of Carnforth, and that route would take him to the village of Heversham and a lovely old inn called the Bluebell Hotel in Heversham, which is still there to this very, very day. He set off walking from Kendal, and he didn't know the area very well. He had his map with him. But by around 5:30 in the afternoon, it was beginning to go dark, and the clouds above his head seemed to get darker. As he entered the little road that would take him over Heversham Head through the forest, a wind suddenly whipped up. The clouds above his head seemed to get darker and darker as he walked down up towards the forest. You imagine you're now in the centre of Heversham Head with forestation on either side, and the track went straight through it. The moonlight flickered through the leaves above his head, illuminating parts of the road in front of him. He thought, I'd better get to the Bluebell Hotel very soon, because it will be pitch black very, very soon. I've underestimated my timings here, really. As it happened, he only had about 2 miles to go. As he came round a corner on the track on the top of Heversham Head, he saw in the distance what looked like a sheep in the centre of the road, sitting in a puddle of water. As he advanced towards what he thought was the shape took the shape of a female sitting in a white nightgown, soaking wet, sitting in a pool of water. She was combing her hair. He could make out her face in the moonlight, and she was stunningly attractive, a very beautiful young girl. And he said, "What are you doing sitting here?" She couldn't hear him. She didn't even know he was there. He stood in front of her and suddenly realised she was not part of this world. John started to run away. He got 100 yards away and turned round, and there he saw her illuminated in bright moonlight, and thought he heard the words, "Oh, oh, when will he come? When?" John then quickly departed. He got to the Bluebell Hotel and was delighted to see the lantern outside the building, and delighted to see a meal waiting for him, and a flagon of real ale. Quite surprisingly, when he got to the Bluebell, he didn't tell anyone. And when he got back to London, he didn't mention it to anyone. But some 6 years later, literally 6 years later, he thought he would go back and retrace his steps. He made his way along the same route, and there was no one there. He got to the area where the pool of water had been, and there was no one there at all. He then got to the Bluebell Hotel, and he walked up to the bar and told the landlord what had happened to him 6 years previously. Now, the landlord was cleaning a pint flagon, and it slipped through his fingers and smashed at his feet. His eyes lit up, and he said, "Hey, I reckon you've seen the ghost of Rosie Gill." "Oh, yes, tell me about her," said John. "Well, I will do. Rosie was a very, very beautiful young lady. She had long black hair, like a raven-coloured hair, a very bonny girl. She lived at a farm at the top of Heversham Head called Mabbin Hall. All the local lads really fancied her because she was such a stunning young lady. She reminded me very much of a goddess. She was so beautiful," said the landlord. Now, she only had eyes for one lad in the area, a young lad called Michael Brown, and Michael lived in the small hamlet of Hincaster, not too far from Heversham Head. He was a farm labourer's lad, and she really did like him. And he liked her, and they made plans to get married at St. Peter's Church here in Heversham on Christmas Day. Well, all the local lads were jealous of Michael. In fact, I remember in here, a good 6 years, a good 10 years ago, one or two lads saying, "That Michael Brown, I'd like to crack his skull. He's got the beautifulest girl in the area." Well, Michael was found dead at the top of Heversham Head, in a field very near Mabbin Hall. His horse was by his side. The local doctor was called, and the doctor looked at Michael's injuries and said, "Well, he's had some severe cranial injuries here, which aren't really what I'd call identical with falling off a horse, but there's no one around here, so I'm going to record his death as death by misadventure, an accident." Many people believe that Michael had been murdered. Now, Rosie's father was the first person to be told, and he thought, "I just can't tell me daughter. I can't. It'll break her heart. They're going to get married in 4 days' time. I just can't tell her." Well, Rosie came home that night with a skip in her step. She was looking forward to getting married in 3 days' time at St. Peter's in Heversham. Her father just couldn't bear to tell her. On Christmas Day morning, she came rushing into her mother and father's bedroom. "Where's Michael? Where's Michael? We're getting married today. We're getting married today." Her father looked up and put his hands around his daughter's waist and hugged her deeply. "Love, I'm so sorry, love. I can't keep it back any longer. Michael's dead." Rosie screamed. Her heart was snapped in two. She screamed and screamed. As she screamed that Christmas Day, huge black clouds came floating up from the Kent estuary towards the village of Heversham, and there was an almighty thunderstorm. Bolts of lightning came down from the heavens, and heavy, heavy rain came down. Rosie ran down the lane. Her mother and father were deeply distressed, and they said, "No, let her go. She'll come back in her own time. Let her go." Rosie never came back. She was found on Boxing Day morning, laying down in the road in a small pool of rainwater. She'd somehow drowned in the rainwater. Padster was told the whole story and took a deep sigh and said, "Well, I did see the ghost of Jane Gill."
Sent shivers down my spine, that one.
It's a very beautiful road.
It is, yeah. It is. It's a lovely area, isn't it?
Well, South Lake is gorgeous.
All of those areas are lovely.
Totally unspoilt. Lots of limestone outcrops and lots of forestation and these beautiful little farms that have been there for many, many years.
Yeah. Of course, they get a lot of wet weather up there as well, don't they? Obviously, that's why it keeps so green, I think.
English Lake District,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Well, Simon, have you got things lined up for this year? Or I mean, have you been any tours at all? Or is the distancing really sort of finished it? I mean, can you not take coach tours out with people?
I had a coach tour on Friday. It was the first one since the 27th of March. It was a fantastic tour. It was a Pendle Witch tour where we made our way to all the Pendle villages. And it was great to be working again. And then all of a sudden, the government said, from now on, only groups of 6 can meet. Yeah. And I've lost so much work. I mean, I've got my diary here, David, actually, and the amount of coaches that have cancelled, I've just lost count, really.
That's what I mean. So that's kind of ended that whole thing, is it, really?
Yeah. Also, I met a lovely guy called Jason Carl, a lovely lad. And Jason had been working for Most Haunted when they first started. And he came up with a great idea to make a pilot show, and he asked me to get involved, which I did do, and I thoroughly enjoyed the pilot show. And that was sent to the commissioners, but because of COVID, it's all been put on hold. So again,
so it hasn't got off the ground yet.
It hasn't even got off the ground. In fact, I don't think it's even been watched by the commissioners, David. But it is a shame because it was again storytelling. And I think the audiences are out there to listen to good ghost stories.
Oh, certainly, and certainly by yourself, because you tell them so well as well.
I enjoy it, David. I enjoy it, and that's half the battle, really.
Yeah. I mean, your show, what's it called? Come on, give it a plug.
Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. On
the same Paranormal UK radio network as this one. And Simon gets a very good following, and I can say that firsthand, I know. It's very popular, especially, I think you're very popular over in the States. I think they like to hear your gentlemanly English voice, don't they?
The Americans, they can be very, very gullible, can't they, really? It's really funny. I did visit Philadelphia quite a few years ago, and I went into a bar in Philadelphia, and you're quite right, they do like the English accent. And this chap said, way back in 1944, I was in the United States 8th Army Air Force in Leicestershire. A guy called Peter Nesbitt. No, I've never actually met him, and he was quite shocked that I didn't know this chap from Leicestershire.
Yeah. Mind you, we've done the same. A friend of mine went to Yosemite Park, but he was actually asking for Yosemite, so we're all the same.
Yeah.
And Birmingham.
Oh, Birmingham.
That's a famous one. But,
what I did find amazing in Philadelphia, though, David, I've got on this, it was a double-decker tourism bus, and went right down Independence Mall, past the Liberty Bell, and the tour guide, a lovely girl, she said, and on our left we got Pendle Hill. I thought, what?
Another one.
And there was this gorgeous white building with the words Quaker Movement, Pendle Hill. And, way back in 1743, a gentleman from Leicestershire, would you believe, called George Fox. George was a real rebel, an absolute rebel. And he'd been in prison no fewer than 15 times for blasphemy by saying, you don't need to go to church to be a Christian. You don't need to go to theological college to become a priest. Anyone can be a priest and anyone can pray to the good Lord anywhere. And he walked on top of Pendle Hill, sat down, and had this vision of a brand new religion called the Quaker Movement. He came down from Pendle Hill, was immediately arrested, sent to Lancaster, and was going to be executed for the 15th time. He'd been all over Great Britain and always arrested and condemned to death for blasphemy. But on each occasion, he was reprieved. Now, after 1750, this country became a republic, and Oliver Cromwell was the Lord Protector. And Cromwell heard about this man causing all this grief and said, I want to see this George Fox person. And Fox was brought to him. And George Fox actually reduced Cromwell to tears. And Cromwell said, look, this man's done nothing wrong at all. Let him go. He went straight across the Atlantic Ocean to Pennsylvania, met William Penn. And, of course, in America, the Quaker movement is huge, absolutely huge. And in Philadelphia, of course, is the capital of Pennsylvania, is this beautiful white building called Pendle Hill. It's a great story, really.
They probably got the name from the same thing. 'Cause, I mean, there's lots of English names that end up over there, aren't there?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
You've just you've really whetted my appetite tonight.
Go ahead.
Really, this is quite a gorgeous story. Again, it has got an American theme to it, really. We will go back to Samlesbury Hall, and to this very, very day, Samlesbury Hall's got to pay for itself. It gets no help off the government, although it is a Grade 1 listed building. And one of the most lucrative events that take place there are weddings. You can get married at Samlesbury Hall, would you believe? And they have weddings, I think, booked up for the next 18 months, every single Saturday. But by far the most famous wedding ever to take place there was the wedding of a British Army officer to a young lady called Jane Bradall, whose father was the third owner of Samlesbury Hall. He was a serving lieutenant in the British Army. They got married on the 21st of October, 1771. Being a serving British Army soldier, he was sent overseas to the garrisons at Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Boston. When he got to Boston, his wife absolutely loved New England, and she said, "Oh, John, I wish you could resign your commission. We need to settle here. This looks like the land of opportunity." Great idea. I'm sick and tired of the army anyway. So they settled and they formed their own business and were doing very well. Their neighbours were doing very well. This was the land of opportunity. However, one person recognised this more than anyone else, and that was good old King George back in England, and he thought, these people need taxing and taxing and taxing again. So John said to his wife one day, "I'm working my socks off, and all I'm doing is paying tax to the king back in England." Now, he then met a gentleman called George Washington, and George Washington's family came from a place called Yelland Redmayne, which is Carnforth in North Lancashire. And Washington recognised Creasap's Northern English accent and said, "John, I believe you've served in the British Army. I would like to form a rebel army and throw the British out of North America. Will you join me?" "I will join you. I'm sick and tired of this taxation. It's got beyond a joke." So therefore, John Creasap became what's called a Pathfinder General in Washington's rebel forces. He was at Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Ticonderoga, and the final surrender at Yorktown in 1781. Now the Brits had gone. America was an independent country, and Washington became their first president, and he invited Creasap to his headquarters in Washington. "Ah, John, I'd like to offer you a position in the new United States Armed Forces as a general. Will you take up this position?" "I will, sir. My quest for you is to encourage the natives to leave New Hampshire, New Jersey, and indeed New England. Will you carry this out?" "I will, sir." Well, it's fair to say that John Creasap committed many illegal crimes against the local natives, and many a brave and many a squaw died due to his actions. But all good things come to an end when he was captured by the Huron, North American Canadian Indians. And just like John Wayne in a famous Western movie, he was tied to the totem pole and ordered to be given the death of 1,000 cuts. Now, Creasap was a Yorkshireman, and we all know about Yorkshiremen. They can be very, very stubborn folk. In fact, Sir Ranulph Fiennes will take no people from Yorkshire on any of his tours because they like to whinge and complain about everything. Creasap was no different. Tied to the totem pole, showed no emotion, and was heard to say to the Indians, "You'll get nowt from me." The Indians had never seen such courage, such bravery. He wasn't even scared to die. They thought he must be some form of devil, and they released his bonds. He rushed into the forest and got back to Washington's headquarters. "Sir, I've had enough of this, sir. I would like to return to my native Craven in West Yorkshire." George Washington said there and then, "John, my country is indebted to you. You will always be an American citizen." He got back to his native Craven in West Yorkshire, a place called Elsack, and is buried there. His grave proudly says General John Creasap, United States Armed Forces, and every 4th of July a member of the American Embassy will make his or her way up to Elsack to make sure the grave has been polished, and fresh flowers placed on top of it. You could say, David, that he is definitely all Yorkshire, all American hero.
I've never heard that story before. That's very interesting. I'm sure there's many Americans out there that probably won't have heard it either. When we talk about places like the Alamo, there were a lot of Irishmen and Englishmen, and they weren't all Americans, were there? A few Tennesseans, and but I think most of them were Europeans, weren't they?
They were. There were a lot of English boys there, and Welshmen,
yeah.
And Scotsmen. Yes,
we can't forget the Scotsmen, can we?
No.
But
sorry, David. There was one other little story that could really link onto that one actually quite well, really.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
For our American cousins, it's the sort of story that would again make a great Hollywood movie. So we go back to 1781. The Brits have surrendered at Yorktown with the help of the French. The French and the Americans joined forces, and the Brits surrendered. America became independent, and she started to flex her muscles by having her own army, her own navy. And towards the early part of the 19th century, there were many incursions by American troops into Canada, and they set fire to Canadian government buildings. Now, of course, Canada was part of the Commonwealth, part of the Great British Commonwealth, and the Canadians got very annoyed, and so did the Brits as well. And Lord Wellington, at Horse Guards, summoned one of his top generals, Major General Ross, and also brought in the Royal Navy, Admiral Cockburn, and said, "Gentlemen, I would like you to teach our American cousins a lesson. Could you come with a plan, please?" Well, the Royal Navy and the Army got together, and they said, right, we need to sail up the Potomac River straight into Washington, D.C., and attack the White House and the congressional buildings and set fire to them. Wellington gave Major General Ross the very, very cream of his armed forces. The Royal Navy, of course, had their own Marines, but the Army brought in the very, very famous Royal Scots, which had a great reputation, the Royal Green Jackets, which were light infantry, and the York and Lancasters that had done so well in the Peninsular War, the very, very cream of the British Army. Some 7,500 men altogether, along with the Royal Naval Ratings, they set off, and they made their way straight towards the Potomac River, which would lead into Washington. Of course, the Americans weren't stupid. They had scouts, and word filtered back to Washington that this British invasion force was on its way. They had 5 days to get all the preparations ready, and President Madison of the White House said, "We know the British, when they land, they'll get their fifes and their drums, and they'll start to slowly walk towards us. We'll get our cannon, our cavalry there, and we'll wipe them out before they even get to the shoreline. We know how the Brits work. We've been studying them for many years now." Now, this was an invading force, and Major General Ross told all his senior officers, when you land, don't wait for us. As soon as the first people land, go straight to Washington. And that's exactly what they did. They were rowed ashore very, very quickly. But instead of waiting by getting the fifes and drums ready, which the Americans thought they would do, and probably having a cup of tea, getting the campfires going, they didn't. They just advanced inland. And they burst through the American lines at what we call the Blandenberg Heights. And one Royal Scots officer mentioned that the Americans were running away so fast, some of our advance parties were actually overtaking them. They got into a deserted Washington, D.C. on the 24th of August, 1814. The senior officers made their way inside the White House, and there they saw table after table with beautiful cutlery and hot stew ready over the fires. The building had been completely deserted, and this was a meal to celebrate the American victory, except the Brits, of course, had got to Washington. Major General Ross and the senior Royal Naval and Army officers sat down and enjoyed an extremely good meal on the American government. In the meantime, one Royal Green Jacket officer went upstairs and made his way into President Madison's bedroom. He was amazed to find Dolly Madison there, the First Lady. She was the only person left in the building. He assured her that he wouldn't hurt her, and she said, all I want to do is just rescue the portrait of George Washington. With a knife, she cut away at the canvas, rolled it into a scroll, and left as quickly as possible. The officer then helped himself to President Madison's shirts, and also a large bundle of love letters, which in 1997 re-emerged at the BBC show Antiques Roadshow at Brighton, where they were put on display. So the officers have this fantastic meal. They then set fire to the White House. The roof caves in. They go next door to the Congressional Building, set fire to that. And on the hills overlooking Washington, there is a red glow from the city down below, because all the warships are on fire as well. And one young lady hummed a tune called the Star Spangled Banner. And that, of course, this very day is the American national anthem, which was conceived when the Brits set fire to Washington. Major General Ross and his men then made their way back to the Blandenberg Heights and rejoined their warships. They'd only lost 7 men killed and 13 wounded. The American casualties were 5 times that amount. Hollywood has never made a film, and I don't think even if they did, Mel Gibson could save the White House from being set on fire. But it's a great story. It's a great story, David.
Yeah, it is. So that's where the Star Spangled Banner came from. So
yes.
I wonder where she got it from.
Well, she must have just started humming it. Oh, can't you see? I think that's the very, very first part of the hymn, really. But it must have been quite a shock.
Oh, yeah, I suppose if she was just humming it or so, it's something that she could have just made up. Yeah. Very interesting.
It is a fascinating story, really, but I've never been to the White House, I've never been there, but I'm told that to this very day, scorch marks can be seen in one of the rooms, and they've left it there for a reason, of course. They've left it there for a reason. And I believe they do have guided tours of Washington. I don't know if you're allowed to go inside the White House itself, but the story of the day the Brits arrived is still remembered. And really, when you think of it, it was a very daring raid. It really was a very daring raid. Reprisals for the Canadian government buildings being set on fire, of course. Yeah.
Well, seeing how things go next year, I was actually hoping to go to Washington next year anyway. So I would like to do a White House tour. So if I beat you to it, I'll let you know.
Well, apparently, ghosts there. There are quite a few ghosts there. Dolly Madison is one of them, because she felt ashamed because her husband ran away. And she stayed in the White House and had this conversation with this Royal Green Jacket officer. And she's, of course, a national hero in America to this very, very day. But it is a really, really beautiful story. There's no ways about it.
Absolutely. Well, Simon, I guess that's it. Unless you've really got any more amazing stories for us, I guess we'll draw a line on that one.
I've got a date right now, David, with a bottle of beer.
I've got to be honest, I've been drinking one of those little import ones. I've just been drinking one. It's been, I'll tell you what, anyone listening today, it's been such a hot day here, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, it really has. It's been a gorgeous day, but I like these real ales actually, David, and there's one called Timothy Taylor's. From the town of Keighley in West Yorkshire. It's a gorgeous pint. And would you believe it's doing really well, thanks to, of all people, Madonna.
Really?
And she was seen gulping from a bottle after one of her gigs. And everyone was shocked that this young American girl should be drinking bitter from West Yorkshire.
Was it ice cold?
It must have been.
Yeah.
It must
have been. An ice cold beer goes down really well.
I'm going to open it. Right now, Dave, I'm going to have one, yeah.
Good, right. I shall let you go and enjoy that then. And thank you for coming on, Simon. It's been fantastic having you on. You've made...
my pleasure, Dave.
You've made a very impressive appearance again. And I would encourage anyone out there to catch Simon Entwistle's show on the Paranormal UK radio network. I thought, is it one a month you do? Or is it...
it's just one a month, actually. It's usually the last Thursday of the month, David.
Yeah, but it goes out all week anyway, doesn't it, on the network?
Yes, I believe
of course so. You can download the MP3, we call it now, not the podcast, don't we? A bit beforehand, that's always there on demand, and you can listen to all the old shows as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Simon, thank you very much for coming on. It's been fantastic talking to you again. I hope things pick up for you in your business again.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
I mean, I can't see a light at the end of the tunnel for a couple of months yet, but we're edging towards Christmas. Just hope it all settles down again and things can get back to the proper normal, not the new normal. We don't want that.
No, you're right, David. As long as we can still have the odd beer now and then, there's nothing wrong with that, is there? Really?
No, absolutely. And hopefully I'll actually get to meet you again next year.
I'd love to see you.
I was hoping to this year, but we didn't get around to it, so
no.
We shall see how we go next year.
Yeah.
Anyway, take care of yourself, Simon. Thanks again. And
my pleasure, David.
Good night to everyone listening out there, and thank you for Simon coming on. And you've been listening to Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm David Young, and you're listening to Paranormal Dimensions. Thank you. Tune in again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Paranormal Dimensions is as bright and powerful as our celestial star, the sun. And although it's expending thousands of pounds of energy every minute of the day, have no fear. There's plenty left.
Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.